All right, it's time to begin our class this morning, and we're in the last chapter of First Corinthians. And so what we'll do is we'll finish this chapter to the extent that we have time. We will do a very quick overview of First Corinthians. Unfortunately, for very quick, there's probably at least one class period, and then move on into Second Corinthians. As we move into Second Corinthians, what I'm going to try to do, and I'm not going to make any great promises, but what I'm going to try to do is before we actually cover a section, I will go ahead and email out the slides or produce paper copies, whatever works with people. I know there have been several people that have asked for a class book, and I have resisted. I've dug in my heels. And part of that is I don't want to get focused on what does that author say, and you thinking about it from the perspective of someone else who writes a textbook or workbook instead of looking at what Paul actually says. Now, they can be helpful. I understand that. But with the internet nowadays, everything that they had, you can do that research if you want to. And I will, and the slides include questions. I won't include answers, but I will include questions. And that's twofold. Number one, I have to confess, there were times in our class discussion where one of you identified an answer that made me rethink how I was approaching that. That's the advantage of studying something together. And I'm always going to try to leave that open for us to apply our collective wisdom in understanding what Paul has written. But certainly, if I give you the answer, then yeah, maybe you really don't agree with it, but you may not say anything about it. And I would rather you study it yourself, bring what you understand so that we can discuss this. So, with all of that said, let's look at the first part of chapter 16, where he was writing about the collection for the poor saints in Judea, in Jerusalem. And we have looked at this a lot last week, so I don't anticipate we'll spend a long time. But we'll just have 4 verses here. Now, concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches in Galatia, so do you also. On the first day of every week, each one of you is to put aside and to save, as he may prosper, so that no collections be made when I come. And whenever I arrive, whomever you approve, I will send them with the letters to carry your gift to Jerusalem. And if it is fitting for me to go also, they will go with me. Now, we also looked at the passages in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, dealing with this as well. And we read this last week, and we'll probably read it in 2 Corinthians. So I'm not going to focus too much on that now, other than it is providing a little bit more of the background of their collections. Multiple congregations were interested in doing this. And there was a way in which they were going to do it. As we talk about it, we'll certainly think about how Christians did things at that time. We also looked in Acts chapter 4, which is an example of what the church in Jerusalem did after it was founded. They had many people who didn't live in Judea who came for the Passover and probably stayed for the Pentecost. And now, because they have discovered something new, they have been taught Christianity, they have become Christians, they have stayed. So you have all of those people who are staying and can't go to an ATM machine and withdraw money, assuming they had that much money to begin with, combined with the existing poverty that was already there. And so there was essentially a crisis within that group. And there were individuals who were trying to help take care of that. We find here that a number of them, it mentions Joseph, who was also called Barnabas. Of course, Luke is including him because he is part of the ongoing narrative, who owned a tract of land, sold it, and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. So a lot of people were trying to take care of those who were in poverty in Jerusalem. Of course, this is 25 years or more after or before Paul is writing to the church in Corinth about taking care of saints in Jerusalem. So apparently it becomes a long-term thing. Now, get to the questions, and ask you to think about some of these things. Paul briefly identifies a financial collection. What was this for? Again, it was pretty obvious. It was for saints in Jerusalem. So what directions did he give? And what was the reason for these directions? We answered that last week, so this ought to be easy. Anyone? Yes.
Told them to be gathering the funds that they had intended, that when he comes, it won't be a matter of going from house to house or having to call a special meeting, that those will already be collected in one place, ready to go.
Okay. So he tells them that you are to put together a contribution on Sunday. Is Sunday the contribution day? Is that why he's identifying this? What is special about the first day of the week? Yes, Corey.
That's when they all would have gathered to work.
Okay. So if they were all there, that was the time, obviously, that they needed to put this in place. Yes, Corey.
Often when we're doing the collection, we'll say, as a matter of convenience, we've decided to take an opportunity to collect. And I think that was probably part of it. If they were all there together, it would have been easy for them to bring it and give it to one person.
Yeah. Now, it says nothing about how they did it, the mechanism. Did they pass baskets around? Did they have a collection box, which was more typical of what would have been done in the synagogues of that time? None of that's discussed. Yes, Bill.
One of the things that struck me as we looked at this for the last couple of weeks, Paul wants this all done ahead of time, which prevents people from making on-the-spot decisions about what they're going to do to support this particular work that was being collected for. And I have to say, years ago, this is back in the 50s, that's how many years ago it was, had a group come to town. This is not unusual. Tent meetings. People would bring a tent, put the tent up, and then someone start preaching lessons. And the collection was always totally wrong from the way it was done. On the first day of the week was not. It was 4 or 5 collections virtually every meeting. And people would be reaching in their pockets. And I'm, even as a young man at that time, very young, of course, I thought something's not right here. This is not how you do this. And I was amazed when I found out there's a lot of things that a lot of religions do wrong. And then it's just, are we doing everything right? I think we're doing as best as we understand the scriptures when it comes to the collection. And there's 4 other reasons as well, which I know you're going to bring up here shortly. But anyway, that was none of this. Oh, let me see what people was, if they were going to this meeting every night, they would plan to bring a certain amount of money and give it in portions instead of, because that hat was passed off in these situations. That's all I'm saying.
I'm going to get back to that maybe in a little bit, but we find certainly different congregations, a number of congregations in Macedonia who have decided that they want to send a contribution. I didn't put in a map here, but Macedonia is closer to Jerusalem in some ways than Corinth is, because you got to go west to get to Corinth. So why would those individuals from Macedonia travel to Corinth?
There's a major port there.
Okay, that is certainly one thing. Ephesus is probably closer with a major port there. And again, we touched on it last week. They didn't have a Brinks or Wells Fargo. How was each congregation sending its funds?
They were each sending a person, correct?
Yeah.
So I guess the more people there would be better, a bigger group would be harder to. That's what.
Yeah, I think so. There's always security in numbers, right? Even if you're not a soldier, you're still able to beat off thieves if you got 5 or 6 of you rather than 1 of you. So they're coming to Corinth, but they want to go to Jerusalem. So you think maybe that is part of the consideration that Paul doesn't want them to have to wait around for days or weeks while the Corinthians get their act together? He wants everything ready so that if Paul is going to stay in Corinth, then the Corinthians will pick someone to go with these other men and go to Jerusalem. If Paul decides, no, I'm not going to stay very long in Corinth, then, they can travel with him and he can provide the introduction to the elders in Jerusalem. So all of this is built around practical arrangements of how people are going to carry money. Now, I think there are a couple of principles. Let me ask the last question first. What was the relevance, or what relevance do these commands have to us today? No?
This election for the saints is doing, in my mind, the Lord's work.
Okay.
Okay? There's needy saints God wants us to help. Needy saints, even if it happens in this day and time. But this is the Lord's work. This contribution that we do on a weekly basis is to support the Lord's work here, and then, if possible, to support the Lord's work in other places. And so we need a place to meet. It's perfectly appropriate that the one who labors preaching the word is supported. And it's scriptural from 1 Corinthians, a nice chapter and around that. So it's, some people think that I shouldn't have to give a lot of money. This is not how Paul shows how our thinking is supposed to be about our giving, and that is more blessed to give than to receive. You give, and I've heard over the years, give until it hurts. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Give until you are satisfied that you're doing what God wants you to do. That's the attitude we're supposed to have.
Okay.
I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Corey?
To me, it seems very orderly. You can get the big picture. He set apart a time that they were supposed to do it, who was supposed to be carrying it, what they were supposed to use it for. This wasn't just a kind of spontaneous thing that they would do. Also, Bill said, as he may prosper, they weren't required to give of what they needed for themselves. They were required to give out of their abundance. So obviously, we wouldn't expect someone to give money that they needed for necessities and things like that. I don't think would be appropriate. But as we're talking about like the logistics and everything that we talked about, to me, it just seems very orderly and very organized, and not just, hey, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that, So think that's one of the big.
All right, was this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And this is, it's giving instructions for how to do a work of the church that still needs done today. There are situations where there are needy saints in other places that have opportunity to help. And so these are commands and examples that apply to how we should respond in those type of situations. So because there are still needy saints today, we would do well to follow this example when we're in that situation. Supporting needy saints is one of the, in other places, is one of the things that we're authorized to do as a group activity of the church together. And it requires funds to do that. There are other works of the church that also require funds. We don't have specific instructions of how to collect the funds for those works, whether it's the preaching of the gospel locally or the preaching of the gospel other places, or whether it's just maintaining the needs of the paying the light bills or whatever. There's actually zero instructions of how to collect the funds that we use to pay for the water bill and the light bill. But we do have this example of how to collect funds for providing for needy saints in other places. And so I think we do well to follow these instructions as much as they apply in those other cases to the other authorized works of the church.
Okay. And I'd like to build off of that. Is this money that Paul is talking about them collecting, is it going into a general treasury where they pay for whatever they're building their meeting or any of those other sorts of things? No. This is for a specific purpose. Did they take a contribution or have other means of the members helping if they were renting a building or whatever it might have been? Maybe. Paul doesn't discuss it. Once the guys from Macedonia get there and the Corinthians choose their messenger and they're off on their way, this contribution ends because its function has been fulfilled. And so that's one of the things that I think sometimes we miss. They were collecting, and obviously everything that they were doing and has to be exactly the same because Paul is not identifying those things. I mean, for example, for our light bill, we pay that once a month. Yeah, it'd be nice if all the members here help put a contribution so that I can write a check to AEP and satisfy them to pay the power. Does it matter whether you do it in equal amounts every Sunday or one Sunday a month? And most of our cases, we don't get paid daily, either bi-weekly or twice a month or once a month. So sometimes we get, I think, so focused on the details of what they're doing here, we miss, number one, what's the purpose? And Bill, you made a very good point about that. We should be concerned with others, and Brent has as well. This is one of the things we need to do. And if we decided there's still some brethren in North Carolina who's suffering after the hurricane last year, and we wanted to send them a contribution, would it be legitimate to say, all right, everyone who wants to do that, we're going to put a collection box in the back, put money in over the next month, and we'll send it to the appropriate people? Would that be appropriate? And not touch what we consider our primary bank account? Yeah. So there is some flexibility in what people are doing here. But there's also, I think, another important principle. The saints and the different congregations in Galatia. Were they going to be sending it to Ephesus so that Ephesus would then combine it with their own in contribution, and they would identify a couple of men from Ephesus to take the whole thing down to Jerusalem? Wouldn't have that been the most efficient manpower wise? Now, each congregation was sending their own contribution, and they were responsible for that contribution. Just like Corinth is going to be responsible here. Yes, Corey.
I was thinking one other thing is that they're carrying, I think most of the money at this time was coinage, right? We were going through some quarters and dimes and nickels and stuff last night, and that gets heavy. I don't know how much they were giving, but if a larger congregation gave a whole lot, I mean, it would be a lot to carry for one. I don't know, maybe that would help also, more people carry more stuff.
Yeah. And which involves pack animals and all that other sort of stuff. Yes, Bill.
John, you make a good point though. Paul says now concerning the collection for the saints, it's a very specific need. And also, other point is that was there money also set aside for the congregation there? You know, whatever expenses might be involved in something like that, we don't know, of course, but it's perfectly appropriate to do something that is, in this case, was the collection for the saints. And cut back there, a big bull, whatever, that would be appropriate because we're wanting to help the saints in North Carolina. Just like you said.
Okay. Anything else here? Yes, Corey.
No, I think that was that.
I'm not sure the devil's advocate's necessarily the proper role in the church building, but no, go ahead.
What about other, or does this mean that the only thing we can collect for is needy things? Where would you go to say that we need to up everything else? Like, how would you go about, because not every time we collect things here, at least, not everything goes to a different congregation that may need help because they don't have enough money or they need food or anything. We collect things for the electricity, the building, supporting evangelism, things like that. How would you parlay this into?
Okay.
Or that's outside the scope, I mean, that's okay.
Again, Paul isn't writing about those things. Did congregations support preachers? Very definitely.
Paul wrote about it.
And in fact, even more as we get into 2 Corinthians, he's going to talk about how he disadvantaged himself because he deserved to be paid while he was in Corinth, but chose not to. And matter of fact, we already covered a little bit of that in 1 Corinthians 8, I think it was. So yes, Paul had a right to expect to be paid for his labors. How is a congregation going to do that? Either that or one or two individuals stand up and take care of it all. But if you distribute that responsibility, then yeah, individuals need to make a contribution to do that. All right, we live nice, cushy lives today in the 21st century. We like to have our air conditioning, particularly when it's 95 degrees outside. That's an expense. Either we have to conclude, number one, that's not authorized, and no, we can't pay for a building which has electric lights and air conditioning and such, or we have to assume that the members are going to pay for it. How are we going to pay for it as a group?
Election.
Okay. Essentially, that's for us to work out, isn't it? If you've got a couple of wealthy members and they want to cover everything, that's fine. So is this, maybe what I'm trying to do here, first of all, is make sure that, okay, this that Paul is writing is about a unique circumstance. Unique in that It is not the typical everyday thing that Christians are going to encounter. It is not unique in that we need to be focused on helping others. So you please understand that dichotomy. And so they're looking at, I want to have money to send to a foreign nation, which there's significant logistical problems to handle. That's what Paul is writing about specifically. But it identifies a general principle, just like the examples that Luke provides in the book of Acts, of when churches need to have funds for things, where does it come from? Does it come from bake sales and running a side business? No, it comes from members on funds. And so when we decide, okay, I'm making this much, but I understand so-and-so needs help, I may give some financial support to that needy member. Does it have to go through the congregation? No. Can we as a group decide to do that? Again, within the boundaries of what the church is doing, yes, we can. So part of it is Paul is providing an example here, which we put together with the examples in Acts 2 through 5. And we see, yes, this is how we work, particularly in helping others. But part of it is just a little bit of common sense. If we as a group incur a financial liability, when we bought this building, for example, how are we going to take care of it? We as a group need to pay for it. No.
Back in Acts 4, things that were sold, the Christians then were selling things that they owned, bring money and lay it at the feet of the apostles. Someone was going to be involved in making decisions what was done with that money then. It wasn't just, there's just like you said, we can do individual giving to anybody within this congregation, or
Anyway,
if we have the finances, we may be doing, maybe a neighbor or something like that needs help. Point of it is that you've got to have some way of making sure that everybody is taken care of properly. That's what the apostles were doing. They were making sure that everything that was given was properly given out to those who had need. It's always been a principle that I've seen within the church itself, is that if there's a need, you take care of it. And I've even seen situations over the years where money that had been set aside by the particular church would give some of that to help in a needy situation. Sometimes needs were so immediate that you couldn't sit around and wait for a collection to be taken.
sometimes that's the case. Sometimes we may decide that while we're together on Wednesday night, a member needs financial help. And several may contribute to helping that individual. It can even be everyone within the group who's there that Wednesday decide, okay, we're going to put together some funds. It does not have to go into the church treasury to do that. Any other thoughts before we move on? Yes, Ed.
What I like about the way God wants us to take care of each other, and He wants us to show that in love. Even though He gives us the money to take care of ourselves in the way of doing things, but at the same time, He's testing us to see what we will do, how we'll do things. We can't show love toward, we have our assembly here, but we also got to understand that we need to spread our love on out to other places.
Yeah.
And I forgot about the one where they took up money, sold lands to help those Christians give what they didn't have. But we also got to remember too, our times as a whole, we seem to have a whole lot better than what they did. Because I always go back and think they had to, it was a survival game. When you had wars, you had things taken over, you had things that happened, families lost husbands and things in war. There's a lot to play with that too. They needed him because they didn't have the best lands to grow things in. They didn't have the best different things. So you had to help one another to try to make things work or make things meet. But the biggest thing God wanted us to do was to help one another to have what each other had. And then and at the same time, what else do you kill out? You kill out somebody having envy over what somebody else has got. You don't have to worry about that problem no more because everybody's pretty much about the same thing. So you kind of kill that bird with just one stone or a couple of stones, just changes things up, but it does help us understand. That's what I was thinking about the verse where what Jesus was saying about we're to take care of worldly people too, but don't forget to take care of those that are among you.
Yeah.
That's what makes me think.
I agree with everything except the envying part, because all of that comes from within.
Oh, yeah.
And a person doesn't have to be that disadvantaged to be envious, because that's an internal attitude. And we'll get into this once we go back through the passage in 2 Corinthians. But if you look at the discussion of giving, it's never presented that the church or Christians even have a function to end poverty and discomfort throughout the world. That's, if you're measuring our success as Christians by how much of the world's poverty we have eliminated, you're looking at the wrong thing. We are giving, and we are told to give, certainly to help others, but it is to benefit ourselves, not from a physical standpoint. It's not Paul's, if you give $10, God will give you $100 instead. No, that's not what he's saying. But spiritually, you grow and develop when you're able to do this. Our measure of success is never, have we given enough to end poverty or make sure no one's hurting or those sorts of things. That's not our standard. Our standard is, have we given as much as we can out of love for each other to do that? Yes, David.
That should be enough for any child of God. And that's all. That's the attitude of people. What's happened since that time is what people need to really think about. And why? Why do people do what they do? Why do they think like they do? Attitude of God's people should be that.
And you please note that he's not expecting them to impoverish themselves in the process, but to give out of their surplus for the needs of others. Now, all of that was put together with Paul's discussion of his travel plans. But I will come to you after I go through Macedonia, for I'm going to go through Macedonia, and perhaps I will stay with you, or even spend the winter, so that you may send me on my way whenever I may go. For I do not wish to see you now just in passing, for I hope to remain with you for some time, and if the Lord permits. But I will remain in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door of effective service has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. Now, if Timothy comes, see that he is with you without cause to be afraid, for he is doing the Lord's work, as I also am. Let no one despise him, but send him on his way in peace, so that he may come to me, for I expect him with the brethren. Now, concerning Apollos, our brother, I encouraged him greatly to come to you with the brethren, and it was not at all his desire to come now, but he will come when he has an opportunity. Be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. As we look at this, Paul, again, is writing this while he's in Ephesus, which isn't terribly far away, but he's not planning on going to Corinth directly from Ephesus. He's going to go back to Macedonia. And part of the reason he's going to do that is the Macedonian congregations are going to have their designated messengers ready, and they're going to travel with Paul when he gets to Corinth. Now, when we get into 2 Corinthians, we're going to see that things don't work out quite the way that Paul was hoping here. But nevertheless, that's his plan right now. And he's then, after he goes to Macedonia, he's going to go to Corinth. How long is he planning on staying in Corinth? Maybe a short time, but he'd like to stay over the winter. He has a time reference in his mind for all of these things that are going to happen. And he wants to spend more time with the Corinthians. Has the letter so far given us any hint as to why he might like to do that? I see one person shaking his head, but go ahead, Bill.
Talks about Ephesus, the wide door for effective service is open to me and our many adversaries. So he's saying that the spreading of the gospel there is being productive.
Yeah.
And the many adversaries are those who are going to, usually would be Jews in this case, trying to destroy the spread of the gospel in that area. So he wants to stay there, I say, to deal with it. That's what I think.
And this letter that we have been covering is certainly dealt with more congregational problems than any other letter that Paul wrote. And again, it helps when you look at it from what he writes in 2 Corinthians. But he sees a lot of problems there that he's trying to deal with by letter that I think he would like to deal with in person. So I suspect that's the reason that he is hoping to be there. Now, our time is gone, and we haven't quite finished chapter 16, but hopefully the rest will breeze on through. Do our review, also start our review also next week, and then move on to 2 Corinthians, maybe the week after. Who knows? Maybe we're lucky. All right, thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate those who are contributing and encourage others to do so as well. Thank you.
Legislative plans of license